Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Adobe Live. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and welcome to Home for the Holidays. You just saw Andrew design his magical and wonderful holiday card, and I'm going to be taking over that process and bringing it to life using Adobe XD, Auto Animate, Video, Lottie, and who knows what else. But before we dive into things, I want to say a big hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining us live here on Behance. If you are tuning in, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Umacorn and Steve, Misty, Voodoo Val, Rick, from Toronto, my hometown. Love to see people from Toronto. Andrew himself, Biola, Wade. Great to see all of you. Hope you're all excited. I would love to see some suggestions on what you'd like to see in an animated holiday card. I'll probably be changing it up quite a bit, like I usually do with any design that's passed on to me. But before we dive in, let's take a quick look at the schedule, just so you have a bit of a recap as to what we've been doing over the last day or two. So today we kicked off with Alice Lee. She was designing some holiday tree toppers. Kyle T. Webster was drawing a coloring page, which is amazing, especially if you have kids. I'm going to be printing that out for my daughter so she can scribble it all over the place. Designing a holiday invite with Andrew, and now, like I mentioned, I'm going to be taking things over and popping it into Adobe XD. So let's get onto things. Alrighty, so here we have the good old holiday card that Andrew designed. Now, if you did catch the stream right before this one, it may look a little bit different. Andrew did pass on this version and he did make some changes to the one that he was just working on. So we'll see what happens. Now, this is a Photoshop document, but the nice thing is Photoshop and Illustrator documents can be opened directly in Adobe XD. So if I go ahead and right click, open with XD, bam, here we go. We're gonna get this party going. And as you know, as I'm going through the stream, I would love to hear what all of your plans are for the holidays. Do you have any fun, exciting traditions? Personally, I'm gonna be hunkering down with my wife and daughter. We have a massive basement renovation going on, so we're gonna be keeping an eye on that. But just enjoying the winter and the cold and good old holidays. We got someone from Indonesia, and Sam is in the house. Great to see you. Moat of Void, always love that username. Leo from South Africa, Ryan from Waterloo, Anki from Sweden, Steve from New Zealand. All these places I want to go to eventually. We'll get there at some point. All right, we're in Adobe XD, and this may look very familiar to you if you did catch Andrew's stream just a few moments ago, or if you missed it, definitely go back on Behance and watch it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on animating this particular design. And we're going to be going through all sorts of different tips and tricks, including some of the new features, Lottie and Video. I might also make some design changes, not because I don't like Andrew's design, just because I want to show you how you can create similar things in XD as well. Now, taking a quick look at this particular design, there are a few things that I might want to animate immediately. I think it'd be kind of cool that when the artboard loads, maybe some of these elements either kind of swing into view, or there might be falling snow, or maybe some of the lights actually start flashing. That would be kind of cool, and that's a great opportunity to use some of the new features. So we're going to experiment a lot. I haven't done a lot of this just yet. I've been thinking about it, but I haven't actually dove in and tried to animate some of these. So we're going to have some fun. And again, give me some suggestions in the chat. I will be taking a look. So thinking about these really cute sweaters. By the way, Andrew, if you design these are super cute. So if I dive in here, we have all of our layers, right? And what would be kind of cool is if, maybe as the artboard loads, these sweaters, maybe the clothesline actually stays put, and then the sweaters kind of slide into play. It could be fun. So what we want to do first is really set this up so that animation is possible. Of course, we can animate it right away, but we want to make sure that all of these sweaters and the clothespins are grouped together. So right now we've got the clothespins in a separate group, and then we have the sweaters kind of down below, and then we have the cable line over here. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to ungroup this clothespin group right here. So I can right click and then ungroup. There we go. And Thomas is saying, Howard is streaming. It's Friday already. Is it Friday already? Oh no. We're actually doing a holiday special. I will be back Friday though, but it's a holiday special with Andrew and Alice and all sorts of amazing people. So I'm going to go through and group some of these elements together. Just Command or Control G. I'm just selecting them, holding down Shift and grouping like that and like that. So now we have all of our sweaters grouped. And I'm just going to go through very quickly and just name them 1, 2, 3, 4. Super original, I know. And we have our clothesline in the background. Now, XD doesn't have the ability to actually animate on a path unless you're animating a border or a stroke, right? But there is a hack that we can experiment with. So what we want to do is essentially want to create the shape of this clothesline as an ellipse. So if I grab my ellipse tool, shortcut key E, and I draw something like this out, right? And follow that path like that. It's not perfect, but we will finesse it into place. And you'll notice if I rotate, right, it doesn't rotate perfectly. So what we actually want to make this a perfect ellipse or perfect circle. So if we undo this, hold down Shift, and we want to make sure that this circle follows the same path as the clothesline. It's a little bit excessive, but it should give us what we want, right? Something like that. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we'll start there, right? So we're going to basically use this circle to help guide these sweaters into place. So if I make sure that they're all grouped, I also want to make sure that the clothesline is not inside that group because we're going to animate the overall group. So I'm going to simply group all of these. There we go. And I want to grab the ellipse and actually drop it down to 0% opacity so we don't see it. It's there to help guide us, but we actually don't need to see it. Now, if we take a look and we try to rotate this, look at that. Again, not perfect, but it's kind of giving you an idea as to what's going to happen when the artboard loads and the animation happens. And we can go ahead and bump this circle up, as you can see, or what we can do actually to make our lives a little bit easier is bring the clothesline in a touch, or I can press return to access the path. And let's do this. Let's make our life a little bit easier. There we go. All right, and perfect. So now we have the clothesline kind of finessing that bottom of the ellipse that we're going to be using to guide the sweaters into place. So I'm going to drop the opacity one more time. And now if I rotate, it should, that's a little bit better, right? Perfect. Okay. So what we can do now is we essentially want to set up two artboards. One as to, what it's going to look like when the artboard initially launches. And then the second one is when all the objects come into play. So I'm going to actually duplicate this artboard in either direction, Command and Control D. And on this first one, this is where the sweaters will not be visible. So diving in here, we want to grab that group that contains that secret, top secret hidden ellipse and just kind of rotate these sweaters out of play. Now, if you want to get really fancy with this, because of course we do, right? What we can do to start is actually move these sweaters outwards a little bit. You can either do that before you rotate or after you rotate, and you can just kind of move them outwards a little bit more, just so that when they come into play, they almost look like they are moving at different speeds, right? Just like that, right? Now we're going to get to animating some of the other elements in just a moment, but to show you how simple it is to actually animate these sweaters coming into this next artboard, what we're going to do is we are going to select the entire artboard and then go to prototype mode right here at the top. And when you have an entire artboard selected, it's going to allow you to create a time trigger. So from the artboard level, we have this blue handle over to the right, and I can just drag it right on over to the second artboard, which is our destination. And then inside of the properties inspector to the right, we want to choose time. And again, this time trigger is only available on the artboard level, or if you are working with videos and Lotties, which I'll get to in a moment. And we do want, let's give it a little bit of a delay. Let's do something like 0.4 seconds. So it doesn't kick off immediately. And then we want to make sure that the type is set to auto animate. This is actually going to allow the animation to occur. And if you're like Anki in the chat and you haven't used Adobe XD before, auto animate, what it's going to do is it's going to look at both artboards. So the destination and the original artboard. So these two wired up artboards, it's going to look at what has changed and it's going to animate those changes, right? And in terms of the easing, I think it could be fun to have a snap. We're not really seeing the sweaters at the beginning, so an ease in may not make much sense. Ease out is probably not bad, but a snap could be fun because the sweaters will kind of come in and they'll just kind of settle into place, especially thinking that the sweaters on the first artboard are a little bit more spread apart. So it's going to add to that snap. And then we will let's try 0.6 seconds for the actual duration. We'll see what that looks like. And now we're going to launch the preview. Let's see. Woo! Look at that. That was fun. Let's bump it up to 1 second so it's a little bit slower. That's awesome, right? And like I mentioned, you can continue kind of moving these sweaters around. You can rotate them a little bit, the individual ones. Just like that. And I do have this path still in place so I can make sure that it is kind of, in that right area. Fancy. Andrew says, that is so fun. It is kind of fun. I love it. All right, so we've gone ahead and animated the sweaters, and we may also want to animate a few of the other elements that might be floating around. Specifically these photos here, right? We have these great photos of these, families celebrating the holidays. And before we start this, I'm going to actually just remove the drop shadows. Nothing against Andrew or his design. Drop shadows, I have feelings on drop shadows, and sometimes I love them, sometimes I hate them, and I'm going to just hide them for now. Now, what I want to mention is, again, if you're new to XD, you can definitely animate these things across the artboards, but certain elements will not animate, like drop shadows, and you want to make sure that the names are the same. So if I were to actually add this afterwards or change the layer names in the layers panel, it would kind of confuse XD during the animation. So definitely keep that in mind. And I want to make sure that on this artboard here, we also remove those drop shadows. Umacorn's laughing, probably at the drop shadows. Umacorn knows. So on this one, I might want to maybe, on this artboard, the sweaters came in from the left. So maybe the photos can come in from the right. So what we're going to do is, and we're going to run into a problem, and this is good that we're running into it, because if anyone also is new to XD, you might run into this as well. If I were to grab these photos and shift them off like this, right? Watch what happens to the one on the far right. It pops over there. But in some cases, if this was not wired up, let me actually undo this, just so you can really see what's going on here. If I were to grab these photos, shift them off, right? That one on the far right-hand corner popped onto the pasteboard because we deliberately moved it off of the artboard. Now, because it was wired up in the first example, it did not move onto the pasteboard, and sometimes that will certainly help. But one of the things you can definitely do to avoid that is actually place them into a larger group with something on the artboard. So let's say this rectangle in the background, right? So I might want to place all of these photos and the rectangle into a group, and I'm going to call this background. And I want to make sure to do the same thing on this artboard here, again, just so that we have the same names across both of them. And now what we're able to do is grab those photos one more time and then shift them off. And what you're going to notice, they don't go onto the pasteboard, they don't go onto the other artboard because they were grouped with another object that is still on this first artboard, which is great. And I can use responsive resize to maybe space these out a little bit, just like that. And if I play this one more time, nothing happens because I removed the wire. Good job, Howard. One more time, drag it over to the right. We've got our time trigger. We have our destination. All that stuff is the same, and woo, fancy. All right. Now, we have a few more elements here. We have some snow. Now, this snow looks a little bit different than the one that Andrew had. So I'm actually going to just select this entire group and delete it. And not because Andrew's snow is not very nice, but because this is a great opportunity to actually use Lottie. Now, what we're going to do here is on the first artboard, we can start adding some Lottie animations. Now, again, we're going to run into some problems. I'm going to walk you through that. But I do have the Lottie Files plugin installed, and you can grab that by pressing the plus button at the top, searching Lottie Files, or you can go to lottiefiles.com and download them from there. But if I hop in here, I can search for something like snow. And we've got a ton of different snow animations. Some are on darker backgrounds, some are on lighter backgrounds, but this one looks pretty good. And I can make these larger or smaller. Now, if you're not familiar with Lottie, it was created a few years ago by Airbnb, actually. And what's really nice about these Lottie animations is they're almost always vector-based. So you can make them as large or as small as you want. They're going to look beautiful, and they're all animated. And if you do use them on a website or a mobile app, because they're all vector-based and mathematics and all that stuff that I don't understand, they're incredibly small in file size. Something like this would be like 4 kilobytes or something, right? So, which is great. Now, if I place this on this artboard, and then in the properties inspector, I can choose play automatically, and I can also have this loop. Now, if I go ahead and launch this, things happened, right? It started playing, and then the other animation took place. These are things you have to keep in mind, right? So we do have a time trigger on this overall artboard that's going to override that Lottie animation. So in this case, it might be better to just have this Lottie on the second artboard, just like that. We can have it animate from there. And we could possibly actually have it on the first artboard, but we can set the playback to no playback so that we can kind of move it from the top, maybe like that, and then play, right? And then it starts animating. Now, I'm not sure I love the actual animation from the first to the second with the Lottie file. It looked a little bit strange, so I might just delete it. It fades into view, or you can just have it in the same location. And this is a lot of what designers go through. It's all about experimentation, seeing what works, what doesn't work. That could work, right? And I do have it set to loop on the second artboard, so that snow is going to continue going as long as we just leave this up, which is really nice. And again, these Lottie files are so small in file size that they really don't take up any space. They're just great. All right. Now, another Lottie file we might want to consider adding is maybe a snowman, right? So from Lottie files, we can go ahead again and look up something like snowman. And that one's super cute. I also have this same animation as a JSON file directly in Finder. So this is one that you can just drag directly into XD like that, or again, from the Lottie Files plugin, you can grab it from there as well. And you know, Andrew does have these interesting snow mounds at the bottom. What we can do is we can actually maybe place the snowman maybe in the middle of some of these. So we have some hills. Let's kind of move it back a little bit. There's the snow. Something like this maybe. Maybe the snowman can kind of pop up from the bottom. Let's try that. We'll see what that looks like. We'll have it play automatically on this artboard. And then if I copy it and pop it on this artboard, maybe here we can actually have the animation. Maybe you can pop it like that, right? And we want to make sure on the first artboard, it does not animate. So no playback. Let's see what that looks like. Look at that. So we have the snowflakes and we have that cute little snowman at the bottom animating beautifully, which is incredibly cute, right? Now there are some drop shadows on these snow mounds. If I do have time, I may remove the drop shadows and maybe redo them. Again, nothing against Andrew, just drop shadows, you know, they irk me sometimes. All right, one other thing that I kind of want to show how to do is we have these really cute, colorful string lights at the top. And it'd be really nice to actually have these glow and flicker, and there are lots of different ways we can do that, including, you know, the Lottie Files plugin like I showed. We can look for something like string lights or holiday lights, Christmas lights, whatever kind of lights you might find, and I'm sure there might be something. But another way we can do it is to actually use a video file in the background behind these lights or in front of the lights, whichever. Now, these ones here, because Andrew created them in Photoshop and they are a smart object, I don't have access to the entire thing. Of course, I can open this in Photoshop and then grab all the goodies, but there are some elements in here, as you can see in the layers panel. There's a lot of different layers, but some of them are rasterized. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to delete these lights and the glows, at least for now. I might bring them back later, we'll see. But what I've done is I actually went over to Adobe Stock and I downloaded this Illustrator file. Now, what I do want to mention is on Adobe Stock, some of you may not realize this, is there's a completely free section on Adobe Stock, and you can search for free photos, free vectors, free videos. So vectors, for example, you can look up something like string lights, and you've got how many? 143 completely vector layers or files that are available to download using your projects, all that fun stuff. Or videos, if I go back, we can dive into videos here and we can search for something like flashing lights. Now, I'm not going to preview any of these particular animations just in case some of you are sensitive to flashing lights. Keep that in mind that if you search flashing lights, that may pop up. But there are a few that we might be able to use in the background in a mask group to kind of simulate what flashing or strobing lights may look like for, string lights or holiday lights, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back over to Finder. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we can actually open Illustrator and Photoshop files in Adobe XD. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this open. And we are given our lovely string lights right here. And these are all vectors. So I can just copy these and paste them onto this artboard and make them as large as I want. There we go, just like that. I'll pop that in place. Now I can copy it and paste it over here as well. Now, what we want to do, like I mentioned, is maybe use a video file to actually help, bring these lights to life. So what I'm going to do is inside of each of these lights, there is a layer that they used for the color and the actual bulb. So what I'm going to hold down my Command key on the Mac, Control key on Windows, and also my Shift key. This will allow me to dive into each group, just like this, and select just that layer. And you might be able to see in the Layers panel, there we go, that it's went into each of those groups because I held down the Command and Control and Shift key, and it's selected just those individual layers that are part of the group. And if I copy those, I can now paste them outside just like this, right? So I have essentially the shape of these individual bulb lights. Now I want to keep these separated just for a moment because I'm going to use these shapes later on to add to the glow. But I'm going to duplicate this, Command and Control D. I also want to use the individual shapes to create a Bullion object, and we'll be able to use that to actually house our video, which is really cool. So I'm going to select all of these individual ellipses that I've just gone ahead and selected. And then over within my Properties Inspector to the right, I want to choose the Add button right over here. And that's going to take all of those objects and place them into a single group. Bullion group, right? Now it did change the color of all of them, but that's totally fine because we're not going to end up seeing that color anyway. But just keep that in mind, if you are creating a Bullion object, it will combine all the styles. So you won't be able to have separate different lights for all of them. But with the magic of blend modes, we might be able to do something fancy with that, right? So now that we have all of these combined into a single Bullion object, if I hop back over to Finder, I do have a folder of videos that I've downloaded from Adobe Stock, and many of them are, effect-based. And this one here, this one's kind of cool, right? It has these lights that are kind of pulsing from the middle. They kind of spread outwards, and we can definitely use something like this for the lights. So I'm going to grab this and drag it directly into any of these shapes that are part of this Bullion object, and boop, there we go. Now it's in place. Now, very similar to a Lottie animation, if you do select the video, which I have selected inside of my Layers panel, over within the properties inspector, you can choose how it plays back. So play on tap, play automatically, no playback, so on and so forth. So I can choose, let's say, play automatically. And then in this heads up display, you have a few different options. One of my favorite, actually, I uploaded a video this morning on YouTube. You can trim clips directly in Adobe XD. So if you wanted to start at a certain point or end at a certain point, now this one loops perfectly, so I don't have to adjust this at all, but you can definitely make those changes. And you can choose to loop the playback of the video, which I definitely want to do in this case. Now, if I were to play this here, you're gonna notice. Now, one thing I'll actually mention, because some of you might be wondering, how is this working? Because Lottie and video are playing at the same time. The next update of XD is going to improve on that. So you'll be able to launch an artboard and play Lottie and video files at the same time. Hopefully soon, next few weeks or so, maybe less, we'll see. But at the moment, in your version, one or the other, unless you trigger it. So, you can have the Lottie files playing and then you can click to activate the video. But in a few moments, in update, you'll be able to play them both at the same time. Now that looks pretty good, right? It's interesting, but we definitely want to make some changes to this. It doesn't really look like it's part of the bulbs in the background. So there are a few ways we can go about this, right? So this I'm going to name video, and I'll name this video as well. And one way we can do it is we can actually experiment with blend modes. So I do have the video object mask selected, and then over within the properties inspector, we can experiment with some blend modes. And really, just like Photoshop or Illustrator, the blend modes will allow this layer or group or object or whatever it might be to blend really nicely with the layers behind it. And depending on if you choose a lighter blend mode or a darker blend mode, it'll have different interactions. So something like soft light, for example, doesn't look like it did much, but it blended it really nicely and subtly with those bulbs in the background. So if I launch it one more time, if you look closely, let me zoom in here, we have some nice, very subtle animation going on, right? And what I can do, I can change it to, let's say, overlay, which is a little bit harsher, or soft or hard light's going to be much harsher, right? But it depends on the video that you're actually placing into the object mask. I think soft light looks pretty nice. And like I mentioned, it really interacts with the layers behind it. So we have the layers here set to different colors, right? Now, if you take a look at the video one more time, the video actually has some nice colors. It has some pinks and oranges and yellows and greens, and I think there's a blue at the end of this, something like, yeah. So we might actually want to use just this to determine the colors, because it might be clashing a little bit with the actual bulbs. So let's actually experiment a touch. Let's dive in here and maybe change these colors to something a bit more neutral, right? So let's alter these bulbs a little bit. And this color here, we don't need this one. This is the second one. And this one is the shadow, I believe. So we'll go ahead and change this to something a little bit more subtle. And what I can do now is actually copy this layer here, dive into all of these like I did before by holding down Command and Control and my Shift key. There we go. I can right click and then paste the appearance. So it's going to take that first appearance that I copied and paste it on all of those. And I can do the same thing for this shadow. Oops, I forgot to copy it. That would help, right? There we go. And this one, and then one more over here, and we're going to paste appearance. Now there was one more layer inside of some of these that I'm just going to dive into very quickly and delete, because it is adding a little bit of a unnecessary border around some of these bulbs. There we go, and perfect. All right, so we've gone through and we've essentially taken the light or the color out of these bulbs. And again, we did that because the video that we're going to be using contains some nice colors that we might want to use instead. So if I go ahead and activate that video one more time, because we have the blend mode set to soft light, if I launch this preview, looks okay, right? But it's very, very subtle. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to experiment again with that blend mode. Hard light might look a little bit better. right? So we can see the pinks, we can see reds and greens and yellows. You can also choose something like color or hue or saturation. But I think hard light could work. If you want to go a bit darker, something like multiply. If you want to go lighter, maybe color dodge or screen. But hard light might work. Overlay might be a little bit too, yeah. So let's go hard light. And it looks okay. Now you might remember earlier, I did save another copy of those, the bulbs, right? Now we did end up removing the colors from the original. So it's going to be a little bit strange, but what we can experiment with is maybe setting an object blur, for example, and then maybe, like, let's say color dodge. This will just allow those, bulbs to glow just a little bit. But again, because we remove those colors, we might want to go something a little bit more neutral, maybe white, and then maybe soft light or even overlay, which would definitely blend nicely with not just the bulbs, but also the blue in the background. And we've got something like that. Now, depending on the bulbs that you use and the Illustrator file and the video file, you're going to get drastically different results. So if I actually, as an example, go ahead and replace this video with, let's say this one here, which doesn't have as much color. It's an interesting result, right? But it's very different. So these are things you have to keep in mind. And we have one more, let's say this one here. Also a different result. Less color, different color. So definitely experiment, find the right assets. Adobe Stock has a ton of free assets you can find. Like I showed earlier, we've got all of our video files. All of these ones are free. There's 52 specific for flashing lights. Rusty says, not a fan of the lights so far. Yeah, I mean, they're certainly not perfect. And there are many ways you can go about doing this, but we're just experimenting. We're having some fun with videos and blend modes and that sort of thing. So definitely spend a little bit more time than, the 10 or 15 minutes that I've been spending on these lights. But what I do want to show is, we've made all these changes on this artboard here. We want to make sure we also make those changes on the first artboard. So if I go ahead and copy, there we go. I'm going to copy all of these and make sure that I paste them on the first artboard. That way, when we play, the animation can kick off, and then we've got our lights and flashing and all that fun stuff, right? Let me, on this first artboard, I'm going to go ahead and change this to no playback. There we go. Yeah, I think I completely agree with Rusty. Not a huge fan of the lights. They start off a little bit dark. So, we might be able to actually brighten up some of those colors. And one thing we can do is, because we set the colors all the same, is if we actually dive in here and find that color, which is this one right over here, we can actually hop into our document assets, add that color there, and then right click and press edit. And then this is going to apply a global change. So if I brighten these up a little bit, you're going to notice all the lights are brightening up. Still not perfect, right? I think a lot of it will come down to finding the right asset to use in this situation. And there is a little bit of a border, I think, because of the original Illustrator file that I would probably spend some time removing, but it's not bad. It could work, right? All right. So we've gone through and done some animation. We've kind of moved things into play. Let's actually explore what a slightly different version of this card could look like if we wanted to maybe create a stamp or maybe a different presentation or a border or something like that, right? Should make a few just not working like outside my house every year. That's a good idea, Rusty. And what you can do is, because we used a Bullion object, let me hide this for a second. We used a Bullion object for the video. I can actually dive in here, select, let's say this one here, and delete it. And there we go. That one there, broken. Good suggestion, Rusty. All right, so let's create another artboard over here to the side. I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger so we can actually take this, or at least some of these elements, and place it into this artboard. And very similar to this one, let's go ahead and have some fun designing. Let's set maybe let's do a radial gradient. And then on the middle, we'll do a nice light blue. and then we'll have it transition to a darker blue on the outside. Something like that, right? And like I mentioned, we might want to create maybe a stamp of some sort. So if I grab the rectangle, I can draw something like this out. Make sure to snap it to the center. And if you're familiar with stamps, you might know they have these ridges around, and sometimes they're triangular, sometimes they're circular. There's a few different ways we can go about doing this, but maybe let's experiment with a triangular version. So if I go ahead and maybe draw out a triangle with the polygon tool, shortcut key Y, maybe I'll round out the corners a little bit, or a lot. There's essentially going to be two sets of these. One that's going to add to the actual stamp itself, and one that's going to subtract inside of it. So the first one, let's go ahead and maybe this one will be where we subtract it. So I'm going to go ahead and actually flip this vertically. And then to make my life a lot easier, we can use a repeat grid to actually add some additional ones going across. So with this one polygon selected, Command and Control R or repeat grid right at the top. And then I'll drag a few across. And I can hover in between, I can hover in between to adjust the spacing. But I think that might look okay there. We will see. I'm going to make sure to snap it. Perfect. And then we want, like I mentioned, one more version. So I'm going to duplicate this, Command and Control D. And then inside of the repeat grid, I just want to flip it vertically one more time. And the nice thing is, because it's a repeat grid, it's going to sync those changes to all the other repeat grid cells, right? I can move this over like that. I might have to move it up a little bit. Something like that. Now we don't want it to kind of overflow this way. And this side, that could work. We'll see. All right. Sounds like someone just got home, so my dog is going crazy. So what we want to do now is very similar to the Bullion object earlier. We want to use the add and subtract. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the polygons that we're going to use to subtract, and I also want to select the rectangle in the background. And this is going to allow us to use the subtract option over to the right, just like that. And then we can select the second group of polygons and the Bullion object that we just created and add. And now we have this interesting looking stamp-like result. I would probably, squish these in just a little bit more. So if I do go back before I made some of these changes, I can pull this up a little bit, maybe pull this out a touch, right? Something like that. Doesn't look too bad. And then, like I mentioned, we want to do one more where it's flipped the other way. Move that down, kind of finesse it into place, and then move it on this side. So we're going to subtract this one and then add to this one. That looks kind of interesting, right? Not bad, not perfect. We can definitely take this a little bit further too. What we want to do is also, apply this to all sides. So if I go back, just to make our life a little bit easier so we're not creating so many different Bullion objects, I can actually duplicate these downwards, use the exact same objects. Let's flip it this way. Do it on this side. Something like that. Make sure that it's not overlapping too much. And then here, we want to make sure that the repeat grids aren't overflowing like crazy. Oh, they are backwards, so I'm going to go ahead and very quickly rotate it. There we go. Pull this back in. That was to add. Yep, I want to do that. And then like that. And then one more time, we'll just do it on this side. Okay, there's a lot going on, right? But what we're able to do now is we're able to select the ones that we want to subtract from each side, holding down Shift and the background, and boop, there we go. And then we want to do the same thing for the ones we want to add, and boop. Did I get it, or did I miss it? I missed it. There we go. And now we have something that sort of maybe kind of looks like a stamp. It's not great, but it works, right? And because we have a repeat grid, we can easily dive in here and actually make additional changes, which is going to push those to all the other ones. And if we use components, we can have duplicated it on all the different sides and done something even more dynamic. But these are things we should all be thinking about as we're designing. Again, it doesn't look perfect, but we can take this even further by adding, a border around this entire thing, which could be interesting, right? So if we go ahead and add a border, something like this. Let me zoom in. Let me actually change the color so we can see what we're working with. And we can experiment with the dashes and the gaps. So if I increase the gap, for example, and then maybe round out the caps of this particular border, we're left with these little dots. And if I place this border on the edge, what we're able to do is we're able to use this border to create an additional, set of ridges that kind of go around this stamp. Now, at the moment, we can't really do much with it. So what we want to do is want to outline the path. So under the object menu, down to path, we can outline this stroke, which is going to take that border and separate it from the overall shape, as you can see right here. And now, just like we did earlier, we can actually use this to subtract. Now we can either copy and paste it into the original shape, or we can create another Bullion object. So if I copy it here and then paste it into the subtraction, right? Now it doesn't include the other one. So in this case, we want to create another Bullion object. And now we have these nice little ridges going around our stamp. Again, it's probably not the best design. I'd probably go with maybe the circular stamp shape, but it works, right? But from here, what we're able to do now is actually start placing some of the objects into this stamp, just to kind of give it a little bit of a different design. We can add additional borders. We can add all sorts of things on this particular stamp. So let's go ahead and grab maybe the sweaters. Let me actually duplicate this over so I have a nice set of objects. Let's delete that for now. And we have our sweater, so I can copy that. I can paste that over here. And we might want to make some changes. We also want to make sure that we can actually place them inside of this particular stamp. So in this case, we can actually use this new Bullion object that we created as an object mask. So if I duplicate it and place it on top, I can select all this information, object, mask with shape. That way, if I do select the sweaters and move them outside a little bit, right? Now, it's lagging a little bit because that Bullion object is incredibly complex with all the little borders. So in this case, I'm going to not do that just to save some of my system resources. But let's make some changes to this particular path here. Cable line, I'm going to move on. Oops. There we go. Move that on out. And as I'm wrapping up, I would love to hear if anyone has any last minute suggestions on what we can do to further improve or add some additional animation to this particular element. And I would probably also add maybe a texture to this particular stamp. Maybe we can do something like, what color is a stamp on the holidays? Maybe like an orange, or that's not a nice color. We can do like a blue. We can even add maybe a texture. If I hop over here to Finder, we've got some textures. And let's see, do we have any paper textures? Got a lot of different textures. We have like this kind of perforated texture, which could be interesting, especially around the border. Well, here we go. Pop that in. Actually, let's actually duplicate. Pop that in there. And then we can experiment with some blend modes like overlay or soft light. Experiment with the color a little bit. I don't know if it looks like a stamp. It probably doesn't. But we're going to run with it for now. I'm just butchering Andrew's design. I'm sorry, Andrew. But we still do have these sweaters, right? That we can rotate if we need to. Going to have them kind of floating off there. We can put a little bit of a drop shadow underneath this. A very subtle one. Something like that. Maybe add a little bit of blue in there. That's not a nice looking stamp. I don't know what stamps look like. Let's see. What do stamps look like? Let's go to Dribble. And let's look up stamp. We have some, okay, so there's a white border around the stamp, and then there's like this design in the middle. Okay, that could work. So in the middle of this stamp, we can actually use our rectangle. This will make our life a little bit easier. You can round to the corners a little bit. And this we can actually use for our mask, and that'll look a lot better. So if I duplicate that, I will mask the sweaters, and there we go. Now this stamp in the background, we might want to change that to more of a whiter color. And in the background here, we can use our blue. Aha, now we're getting somewhere. Again, not perfect, far from perfect, but we're getting somewhere, right? This is the design process we all go through. And then we can grab maybe our little snowman over here. We can place the snowman into the mask group. We can bring back our snowflakes, wherever those went. There they go. Place that into the group. Maybe I'll make that nice and large so it fills up the entire thing. All right, getting somewhere, right? Progress. And like we did before, we can also animate these sweaters in as well. So if I duplicate on this first artboard, rotate, oops, I want to make sure that the sweaters are rotating and not the line. Let's make a time trigger like we did earlier. That looks pretty good. And we're going to grab the snowman, move that one down like that. And make sure that these Lottie files are not playing back when the artboard loads. We only want them to play back on the second artboard. Ooh, Thomas says, bouncing the cable line with the sweaters. That could be interesting, right? There we go. Having those sweaters slide in on this line. Oh, so, Sam, we actually did that a little bit earlier. But yeah, that's totally a good idea. And then in terms of the bouncing, how would we do that? Maybe we can just move the cable line a little bit. We could make another artboard to kind of have it loop and bounce up and down, or we can do something like that just so that across these two, it kind of bounces a little bit, and we do have a snap in place so that it changes. Or what we can also do is actually modify the cable line a touch. So let's see, the sweaters would be, I'm trying to think of like the physics of it. If they're sliding on this side, it would be heavier there, right? And it'd be lighter on this side. So it would probably be something like this. I don't know if I'm getting this right. And then something like this. I don't know if that works, but it could work. Can you slow down the snow in XD? Ashley is asking. So you cannot, because the snow came from a Lottie file. You can't actually adjust that in XD, but if you have the original, like the After Effects file, you can certainly do that. And in some cases, Lottie Files does have an editor, lottiefiles.com/editor, I believe, or just edit, something like that. They allow you to make some changes depending on the type of Lottie file. I don't think it allows you to change the speed of it, but there might be a way to actually change the like the raw data. So this is what a Lottie file looks like in the raw data. Somewhere in here might control some sort of speed, but if you can figure that out, I certainly can't. But yeah, in general, you can't. All right, so we've got that. And then we can add in our, let's see, our text maybe. We can add that in there. Want to make sure to add it to both artboards. Perfect. And then we can also add in, so we do have these mounds at the bottom, and I think it could be kind of fun to replicate what these look like. So if we take a look here, it's basically just rectangles that have a little bit of a curve. So if I hop into this mask here, I can create a rectangle, shortcut key R. And then if I double click on it, I can access the path, and this will allow me to maybe add a point over here. Now, if I just pull this up, it's gonna be very harsh, right? But if I double click on it, I can pull this down and then up. Sam is saying, if you time trigger the snow to loop right when the sweaters enter, could you have the snow moving from the beginning? Sort of, yes. So the actual time trigger will override that Lottie animation, so it'll look a little bit strange. But if you move the entire Lottie layer kind of up or down, it kind of works, but it looks a little bit strange. We did try that earlier, but it looked a little bit weird. So now for this one, what I might want to do is just add a bit of a linear gradient. So maybe white on top and then maybe a little bit of a blue down below. And what this will allow me to do is actually kind of layer it, very similar to what Andrew has here. Maybe we can flip it just to kind of give some interesting effects here. And we can also experiment with just kind of moving this around, right? Maybe moving this down a touch. There we go. And now we have some fun snow. And this could also be animated. So if I select all of this, paste it in here, right? On this first artboard, I can move these down, maybe use responsive resize to spread them out a little bit. And then one more time, whoop, we lost our snowman. Let's make sure the snowman is actually, maybe I'll put it below one of the snow piles. Let's see, where, oh, that's the wrong layer. There we go, perfect. So it's below this one here, so we're kind of missing a little bit of the bottom, but it kind of adds a nice little layering effect, right? And then one more time, there we go. And all the animations start to kick off and everything looks great. And to wrap things up, let's go ahead and actually grab the images as well. We'll place these ones in, and very similar to what we did earlier, I will maybe move them to the side here. And then on this one, place them in there. Let's make sure they're, actually we'll do something like that. Photos, there we go. And photos, and then I think it was something like that. All right, we're getting somewhere, right? Bruce says, love the snow mounds. Yeah, I mean, this design is far from perfect, but it's hopefully going to inspire you to create something yourself and spend a little bit more time than I have on some of these interesting ideas, right? And we can also take maybe the bulbs as well. Now this is a larger surface area, so it might need to be enlarged a touch. It's an interesting effect. There we go. And I'll place this one in here as well. All right, that could work. Again, far from perfect, but hopefully it's inspired you to create something for the holidays. Definitely spend a little bit more time than 15 minutes that I spend on this particular design. But we covered Auto Animate, we covered Lottie, we covered videos, we covered all sorts of different things. And Adobe Stock is there for you. They have a completely free section with great vectors and illustrations and photos and videos and all that fun stuff. And look at that. Snowman's happy to be alive, right? For now, until it gets warm again. Anyways, that got dark. But that's going to wrap things up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned into the stream. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you got inspired. We'll be back tomorrow, I believe, with some more amazing holiday-related streams. I will be back on Friday with another Adobe XD Masterclass. Big thank you to Bruce and Sam and Val and Fergie, Tomas probably, Bohana. Great to see you all. Have a fantastic holiday, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.